recording. Okay, welcome everyone. And looks like, welcome Marina, and welcome Henry, Judd, and 79, that's Irwin. So I think that captures everyone. God willing, more people will join us as the shiur goes on, but we should definitely begin. And who knows, because I have another thing at 8 o'clock, we might actually end in less than an hour. We'll see. If I keep talking, that won't happen. Okay, so last week, what we were learning together, remember we learned a Mishnah. It had a very odd case where you had one pair of witnesses and then a second pair of witnesses.
Where are we? Because
we are starting on Hey Amid Bays. We are on 5B. And we are, if you're in the Tzura Sadaf, the regular Gemara page, it's about 5 lines down from the top of the page. The words Hahi Isisa. And if you're an art scroll, I could only assume that it's 5B to the first power. That's probably where it is. Hahi Isisa, there was a woman. So just to understand what we're about to look at here in the Gemara, last week we had a case in the Mishnah on Hey Amid Aleph that described where you have one witness coming into Beis Din, one pair of witnesses coming into Beis Din, a second pair that comes into Beis Din, and they convict the first pair as Adam Zomamen. But then the drama begins to unfold even further. The third pair comes in, Adam Zoman, fourth pair, Adam Zoman, fifth pair, all the way up to 100 and beyond that. So remember, the Chachamim said, okay, it's a weird case, but this pair, the second pair of witnesses, has the power to turn as many people to Adam Zoman as they want. But remember, Rabbi Yehuda protested, and he said, what do you mean? It's Statasizo. This is, they're a group of plotters. They're conspiring here. There's clearly a real conspiracy happening here. If it just happens to be every pair of witnesses that comes in is Adam Zomamen. That's a little bit too much for us to believe. So Beis Din has the license to determine that there's something amiss, even if it doesn't violate a strict halachic issue. Now, based on that premise, the Gemara is going to give us a story that happened with later rabbis and try to connect their opinions into the machlokis in our Mishnah, the argument in our Mishnah. So again, we are in Hey Amid Bays, 5B, 5 lines down from the top of the page. An art scroll, I assume it is 5B to the first power. Hahi Isisa. Hahi Isisa da'asi sahadi vishtakor. There's a woman, whatever her court case was, it's unclear what it was, she brought in 2 witnesses to substantiate her claim, and they were found to be lying. And then she went and she brought in another pair of witnesses, and they also were found to be perjurious. But then the third time around, she brings in a third pair of witnesses. She got lucky. What do you know? We couldn't prove that they were lying as well. So what do we do with a case like this? This woman clearly is, just trying to pay off witnesses in order to lie for her interests. Therefore, we can't trust the third pair. However, Amarle Rabbi Elazar says, "In hihusaka koisomi husaku." Now I understand that we might start doubting her credentials. We might start doubting her cheskes kashrus. But just because we don't trust her doesn't invalidate the kashrus. It doesn't invalidate the legitimacy and credibility of the rest of Bnei Yisrael, any other 2 people that might walk through the door. So that's their machlokus. And this machlokus, this argument comes up again later on. Zimnin havu yotzi kamei de Rabbi Yochanan. It just so happened to be that they were sitting a few days, sometime later, they were sitting in front of the great sage Rabbi Yochanan. And a very similar scenario came to them. Amar Reish Lakish, Huzakazo. Reish Lakish, he maintained what he said before. This woman is clearly conspiring, and she's paying off witnesses to testify for her benefit. But Amarle Rabbi Yochanan responded, Im Huzakazo, Kol Yisrael mi huksaku. Rabbi Yochanan, note, it's not Rabbi Elazar like last time. It's Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan responds the same thing. Rabbi Elazar said before, if all the Jew, or if she loses their credibility, does that mean everyone has to lose their credibility just because they're associated with her? That's crazy, no? So then what happens over here, a little bit of rabbinic politics. Reish Lakish, Hadar Chazi Rabbi Elazar Bishas. Reish Lakish gave Rabbi Elazar a very dirty look. Amarle Shamat Mili Bar Nafcha V'lo Amritli Mishmei. Apparently, Rabbi Yochanan was the senior among them. So you must have heard this idea from Rabbi Yochanan, because Rabbi Yochanan basically used the exact same formulation as you did. And you had the chutzpah to make it sound like it was your own idea and not quoted in his name. And according to Rabbeinu Chananel on Vav Amid Aleph, if you look over there, Rabbeinu Chananel says, Ilu Higata Talik here, Rabbi Yochanan Amar Kach Lo Hayisi Shona Befanav. I would never have stated my position in front of Rabbi Yochanan and argued with him had I known that was his position. So that's just like a little story that gets thrown in right over there. But the point being is that it sounds like the argument between Reish Lakish and Rabbi Elazar is the same argument that we had in our Mishnah. Lema Reish Lakish to Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yochanan to Amar Karabanan. Reish Lakish would appear to be in accordance with Rabbi Yehuda, because remember, Reish Lakish is saying something is wrong, something is amiss. I don't know what's going on, but it sounds like there's something wrong going on over here, that she's lying, or she's bringing in people to lie on her behalf. So he would probably align with Rabbi Yehuda in our Mishnah. The person said, Istatasizo, there's something wrong going on here. I know they're not violating a particular halacha, but I could see that they're plotting something here and that we shouldn't be fooled by them. Whereas Rabbi Yochanan, who is the halachic formalist, he fits with the Rabbanan. He says, look, I see something's wrong, but I'm looking through the Shulchan Aruch and I can't find a breach of a particular code. There's no particular sip that they're violating in the Jewish law. So it might be a very crazy result, but the law is the law. So it seems that we should be able to line up their argument in this case with the argument in the Mishnah, right? However, there's reason actually to distinguish between that. So before we explain why this is not the case, is this detail? I just want to make sure this particular detail is it clear why Reish Lakish would align with Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yochanan would align with the Rabbanan in our Mishnah on Hamid Aleph? Can I sharpen that at all?
That's your salad.
What was that, Phyllis?
I'm sorry.
Oh, good. All right. So now that we understand that, we made it sound like this case of the woman bringing in witnesses seemingly to lie on her behalf is analogous to the case of a pair of witnesses turning 100 other pairs into Edom Zomin. However, there could be reason to distinguish. Amar lach Reish Lakish, ana da ami lach afilu rabbanan. Ad kan lo ami rabbanan hasam delega deka mahader avahacha ika ha deka mahadra. So Reish Lakish, who says, I see something is amiss in the case of the woman bringing false witnesses, I could actually agree with the Rabbanan in their case. Why? Because in the case of the woman, she's the one who is procuring the witnesses. She's the one who's going out of her way to bring witnesses to substantiate her claims. In the case of the Mishnah on Ham and Aleph, it just so happened to be that a second pair of witnesses walked in, and they just so happened to be able to turn everyone else into Edom Zomamen. So now there's nothing clear in front of our eyes that the Edom who are turning everyone else into Edom Zomamen has anything to do with the litigants in this case. They just happen to show up to Beis Din. Whereas in the case of this woman, the second case that we have here, she is the one who's bringing in the witnesses. She's procuring the witnesses. So there's much more reason to assume that something is foul over here, that something is amiss, and that she is conspiring along with these witnesses to testify on her behalf. That's one point that we make, why we can't line up their opinions so easily. The other point is Rabbi Yochanan Amar Lach, Rabbi Yochanan, who was the halachic formalist in the case of the woman bringing false witnesses, he might actually agree with Rabbi Yehuda in the case of our Mishnah. Amar lach, anad amri afilu Rabbi Yehuda. I could even agree with Rabbi Yehuda because the case of Rabbi Yehuda in the Mishnah is different. Why? Adkan lo kama Rabbi Yehuda hasam damrina atu kuli ala gabi hani habu kayame. Because in the case of Rabbi Yehuda, in the case of the Mishnah, it's much more absurd. It's much harder to believe. Why? The case of the Mishnah is I have to assume that for the second pair of witnesses to turn 100 other pairs into Edom Zoman, it means they all had to be standing in the same place on the same day at the same time. You're going to tell me that it just so happened to be that all the other 100 pairs of witnesses that came in were in a different state, at the same convention with this pair of witnesses at the same time? Come on, man. How do you believe that? But here, the first two witnesses, they may have been trying to lie. Who's to say the third pair of witnesses aren't a legitimate pair and that they weren't present to see the crime committed or whatever they were testifying about in that case? So therefore, we can't align their opinions perfectly because this is a perfect example in halacha where we have two cases and we think that one case serves as precedent for the other. But if we look at something with enough nuance and detail, we understand that there's reasons to distinguish. And this is but one of many examples where that occurs in the Gemara.
The witnesses can be standing at different locations and see the same thing from different locations.
Oh, so that's a case that will come up later in the Gemara, God willing.
That's why I raised.
So your memory of Makkos serves you well. We're not talking about it tonight, but it does come up soon in Makkos. So we will get there soon, Bez Hashem. Okay, let me just pause because we just reached the Mishnah. Yasher Koach. Are there any questions I can take to clarify? Any thoughts at this point before we move on to the next Mishnah? Okay, I hope that was clear. There's a little bit of juggling going on over there, but I hope those distinctions made sense. Okay, so for those, in case you lost where we are inside, we are in the second wide line, and it says Mishnah over there. So we're starting with the Mishnah. Here we go. Okay, so again, this is those who were with us for Friday Mishnah. We actually did this past Friday. And this Mishnah is a great example, again, of teaching us a principle that we already learned. This Mishnah, I've referenced a number of times already because we just needed to know it for basic background. But, in case, lest you think that I make these things yesh me'ayin and pull them out of a hat, here's the Mishnah to tell it for us. Okay. Ein ha'edim zomamin nehergin ad sheyigamer hadin. So remember, let's just do a quick review. There are 3 points in time. There's when the witnesses present their the first pair present their testimony. Then their stage number 2 is based in, hits the gavel down, gives a verdict based on the testimony of the Edom, soon to become Edom Zoman. And then stage number 3 is based in, meets out the sentence. If it was corporal punishment, if it was capital punishment, they kill the guy. Those are the 3 stages.
Rabbi?
Yes.
I'm sorry, I always wanted to ask this question, but didn't. Maybe it's a silly question. How come the first stage isn't the actual act of whether they saw a murder or not, or saw something happening or not, rather than actually going to tell somebody else to testify?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure if I follow the question. Can you formulate
Well,
it again?
the first stage is testifying, right?
Correct.
So what about, the fact that they saw or they didn't see it? I mean, it's a personal stage, if you will.
So what I mean by that, when I say stage 1 is they give their testimony, I mean that and anything beforehand. Basically, anything before Gemar Din, anything before the verdict is given, they do not get punished by the court. If there is a Gemar Din, the verdict was given, but the sentencing wasn't meted out, it wasn't followed through, that it wasn't administered, then that's where that's the window of opportunity to become Edom Zomamin. And stage 3, if the person who was convicted based on the testimony of the false witnesses gets the punishment administered to him, then they can no longer qualify for Edom Zomin, but their regular 80 sheker and they get 39 lashes. Okay, so stage 1, no punishment. Stage 2, Edom Zomin. Stage 3, you just get 39 lashes. That's how it works. Now let's see inside the Mishnah. Edom Zomin Harigan Achi Gomer Hadin. The Edom Zomin are not put to death, and the Gemara will explain this refers to any punishment until the Gemar Din. This needs to be after Beis Din gives a verdict based on their testimony. And now, why do the rabbis have to tell us this? Well, because the Sadducees, a Second Temple sect of elitist Kohanim, I know Zadie, you'll appreciate this. So there was back in the times of the Second Temple, there were different sects of Jews. So Rabbinic Judaism, which is what we have, is based off Pharisaic Judaism. And one of the other sects that existed were the Sadducees, the Saddukim, who are an elitist sect of Kohanim, of priests. So, Fred Wexler was with us on Friday when we did this. As I said, imagine, he just grabs all the other Kohanim from the shul. They decide to break off and not only make their own shul, but make their own religion. And where naturally the Kohanim are the only people that matter. And in fact, they also don't want to learn Gemara either. They don't come to the Thursday night class, so all the Kohanim, let's say, and they just want to interpret the Torah literally. That's what the Tzaddukim are. So Shari Tzaddukim Omrim, Anshi Ahareg Shenemar Nefesh Tachas Nefesh. Tzaddukim say, when do you become Edom Zomin? After the punishment is meted out. Why? Because it says explicitly in the pasuk, Nefesh Tachas Nefesh, or literally, actually Nefesh B'Nefesh. So I think I noticed to our crew on Friday that it's a really funny thing. So that organization that helps people make Aliyah to Israel? It's called Nefesh B'Nefesh. I never understood that for the life of me because it means a soul for a soul. You know what Nefesh B'Nefesh means in the Chumash? It refers to taking one person's life in a place of another for committing a murder. What that has to do with Aliyah, I have no clue. But you could ask the Nefesh B'Nefesh people. So that's what the Tzaddukim say. But no, the implication from the pasuk is that the brother, the person that they're convicting, is actually still alive. The Mishnah doesn't make it sound this way, but the Mefarshim point out the real inference is from Kasher Zamam, because it says, as they conspired to do to the defendant, not Kasher Asa, what they accomplished to do to the defendant. So it implies that Hazama is specifically when they conspire, but not when they succeed. If so, why does the pasuk say a soul for a soul? Well, I would have said that if they're punished for being conspiring witnesses, let them be punished even before the verdict is given, even before the Gemar Din. When they initially give their testimony, good. That's the window of opportunity to be a false witness. Why did we wait until the Gemar Din? So that's what we need the extra pasuk for. Lomar nefesh tachas nefesh ha'ein nahargin achi Gemar Din. Until they render this person a dead man, but not literally, but halachically. So you could only become Edom Zomin if you're found guilty of that line through the methods we explained at the time of the Gemar Din, but it has to still be before the actual din, the actual verdict is administered. That is the Mishnah. And this should be relatively familiar, but I just wanted to make sure to clarify it, especially now that we learned the Mishnah itself. Okay, so let's go on to the Gemara. Tana, Baribi Omer, Lo Hargu Neharigan, Hargu a Neharigan. So he says basically what we learned in our Mishnah, or it sounds like that's what he's saying, that if they do not kill the defendant, then the Edom Zomin can become Edom Zomin and be put to death. Hargu a Neharigan. But if the defendant's put to death, then the witnesses can no longer be put to death because that's kasher asa, it's not kasher zamam. It's no longer conspiring. They actually accomplished to kill him. Amar Aviv, Beni, Lav Kal V'chomer Hu. So the father, Baribi, says, the question that you, me, all of us have, which is, wait, let's make a kal v'chomer, right? Let's take out our thumbs over here. If the witnesses don't accomplish putting him to death, yet they get put to death anyway for something they conspired to do, kal v'chomer, when they actually do accomplish putting him to death, certainly they should get capital punishment for something they actually did accomplish, putting somebody to death, right? The classic question. Why can't I make a kal v'chomer like that? Seems reasonable, right? The issue is, no, not reasonable.
Yeah, I think it gets back to something that we talked about early on, which is it's once the death sentence has been carried out, that credit in the ledger, so to speak, has been taken care of. And so they had up until that moment to recant their testimony, in which case the life for a life, and they conspired to do to their brothers, so that should happen to them. But once that life is taken, we're not going to compound that error by taking more lives. I think that's what I've taken out of this whole process of discussing the Edom Zomerman over the last few weeks.
So what I'm taking out of it is that the conspiracy ends when the defendant dies. So there's no longer conspiracy in existence to punish them for.
Okay, but one can still, so, it sounds like you're both on the same page over here, and it seems that shot from Elchanan Wasserman was really compelling. It seems that it went over a few people. That's good. But I guess the question is, in the end of the day, sof kol sof, maybe from a certain standpoint, we could say that the credit in the ledger doesn't exist anymore. But it's still, sof kol sof, at the end of the day, it doesn't seem ethical that they shouldn't be put to death for putting another person to death. Whereas if they don't put someone to death, they do get put to death. So that's the question that he's asking. Now, why don't we do it? Amar lo, Limadetenu Rabbeinu, she'ein onshin min hadin. This is an important term over here. If you're underlining words in your Gemara, this is what you underline. She'ein onshin min hadin. This is an important principle. We do not make kal v'chomers when it comes to corporal capital punishment, to give somebody a corporal capital punishment of any sort. Why? One of the reasons is because if the kal v'chomer, if someone ever disproves it, maybe for the reason, Jeremy, that you reminded us of, if someone disproves the kal v'chomer and you killed somebody on the basis of making a kal v'chomer, you can't say, oh, whoops, guess my kal v'chomer was wrong and we put someone to death on that basis. That's not somewhere we want to be. So even if we think we have an airtight kal v'chomer, we don't give someone capital punishment on that basis. For money, we might do that, because remember we talked about how money could be returnable, but when it comes to capital punishment, corporal punishment, it's not reversible. So we don't use a kal v'chomer, even if it seems obvious to us, like in a case like this. And here's the example actually in the Brisa. Forget Edom Zoman. If you don't think the kal v'chomer is good for Edom Zoman, here's an example where I think everyone would agree. Yet we learn Eino Chiminadin. Titania. We learn from incest. Ish ashir, so we're learning, this is a brisa now. Ish ashir yikach es achoso bas aviv o bas imo. So if a person were to take his sister, whether the daughter of his father or the daughter of his mother, so then he gets punished for committing incest. Ainli elabas aviv shlo bas imo. The pasuk only informs me of a daughter of a paternal sister, ubas imo shlo bas aviv, or a maternal sister. But bas imo ubas aviv, but a full sister, minayin. How do I know that someone also gets punished for committing incest with his full sister, a sister from the same mother and father? Minayin, Talmud lomar ervas achoso gila. That's why we needed the pasuk to tell us ervas achoso gila, which tells us that a complete sister you get punished for as well. But wait a minute, Achlo Yomar Yeshli B'din. Wait a minute, why do I need the pasuk to come tell me I get punished for committing incest with my full sister? If I get punished for my paternal sister, ubas ima shlobas aviv, and I get punished for my committing incest with my maternal sister. Bas aviv bas imo lo kol shekain. Here's a great kal v'chomer. If I get punished for committing incest with my half sister, kal v'chomer, I should get punished for committing incest with my full sister, right? That sounds like an airtight kal v'chomer, correct? We could agree. That sounds like an airtight kal v'chomer. No way you're gonna bust that. However, halimanita she'ein onshe min hadin. Yet the Torah had to tell us that still you get punished for committing incest with a full sister, because I would not have been able to infer that otherwise, because ein onshe min hadin. We do not use kal v'chomers to impose punishments. We don't make such inferences. Therefore, something so obvious that if I get punished for a half sister, I should get punished for a full sister, we couldn't use a kal v'chomer. We need a Torah to tell us that. Now, coming back to Edom's, sorry, just one moment. So coming back to Edom's Zomamin, it also sounds like I have an airtight kal v'chomer. If I didn't put someone to death, I get put to death. So if I put someone to death, I should be put to death. Still, we can't make a kal v'chomer to punish somebody. Ein onshin min hadin. Sadie?
I don't see why we need a separate pasuk to tell us about punishment with a full sister. I see her as falling under two separate categories: the daughter of your father, the daughter of your mother. You can be punished under either category. You committed two offenses, in effect.
It's a good question. That's a good question. I don't have an answer offhand, but what you're suggesting is that I don't need the pasuk to tell me that I get punished for a full sister. It would just be two violations. Well, or the thing is, the way you might read the pasuk is that it's exclusively the daughter of my father or exclusively the daughter of my sister. That seems to be the way that the Rabbanan understood that pasuk, not someone who also happens to be that. So I think that's how we have to answer it. Now, the next few lines of Gemara should flow by very fast because it's the same, almost the same exact Shakavataria. So remember a few weeks ago, we learned a few terms. We learned about Hasra, we learned about Hachraza and Ashara. So we're going to bring back one term right now. Remember, in order to receive capital punishment or corporal punishment, there needs to be an ashar in the Torah where it says, don't do that, don't commit incest. And then B, a second pasuk, which outlines the punishment, what happens in the event that I do commit incest. So now I'm not allowed to make a kal v'chomer to teach a new punishment. But where do I know that I also can't make a kal v'chomer to infer an azhara, a warning against doing something as well? And where do we learn that from? You guessed it, also from incest as well. So one shamanu, now I understand ein onshe min hadin. We can't make a kal v'chomer to learn a new punishment. But ashara minayin, where do I know that I also can't make a kal v'chomer to extrapolate an ashara, a warning pasuk, to something else? Talmud lomar ervas achoscha bas avicha o bas imecha. The erva, the nakedness of your sister from your father or your sister from your mother. Ainli elabas avid shlo bas imo ubas imo shlo bas avid. So that only covers a paternal sister or a maternal sister. But bas avid ubas imo minayin. Where do I know that? Where does the Torah warn me against committing incest with a full sister? Talmud lomar ervas bas eshes avicha moledes avicha achoscha. So the pasuk there tells me, an additional pasuk tells me explicitly that my sister, my full sister from my mother and father, also there, she is considered my sister for halachic purposes of not committing incest. But wait a minute, Ashel Yomar Yeshli Min Adin. Why couldn't I just learn this from a Kal V'chomer that I'm not allowed to commit incest? Ma'am Huzar Abbas Imo Shlobas Aviv. If I'm warned against my maternal sister, Ubas Aviv Shlobas Imo, or my paternal sister, Bas Aviv Ubas Imo Lo Kol Shekain. Certainly a full sister I'm warned against as well. Same idea. The same way you can't infer a punishment through a Kal V'chomer, you can't infer an ashara through a Kal V'chomer. That's what the Gemara infers from incest. And the same thing applies to Edom Zomin as well. Adkan, that brisa. That was all that brisa over there. Okay. Important. So those are two important principles. Ein onchim min hadin, ein mashirim min hadin. Excellent. I'll pause. Any questions for clarification on this? Okay. As I said, the second part was based almost like a repeat of the first part. So there we go. Now, the Gemara is going to switch topics a little bit, and it's going to return to something that we mentioned in the Mishnah. Rashi points out what the question is. He says, so remember in the Mishnah we established that Edom Zomin only become Edom Zomin after the Gemar Din. If they only submitted testimony, but there wasn't a verdict given, they do not become Edom Zomin. So the Mishnah, if you're looking closely, it says in the Mishnah that nehergin achi gomer hadin. They don't get killed until Gemar Din. So the Gemara asks, Chayve Malkios minayin. How do I know that when I'm not getting put to death by Beis Din, but I'm getting Malkus from Beis, I'm getting lashes from Beis Din, that there too, I also have to be past the point of the verdict and not before the verdict. Talmud Lomar, Russia. The Gemara employs a Gezerah Shava. A Gezerah Shava, basically what it does is that if I have two topics in the Torah, but they share the same word, then many times that's a code to teach us that they share certain laws as well. So since the word Russia comes up in the laws of capital punishment, and it comes up in the law of receiving Malkus, we learn that the same way you're not put to death until after the verdict, until Gemar Din, so too you don't receive Malkus until after the Gemar Din as well. And same thing, Chayvi Golios Minayin. How do I know when you're not getting Malkus proper, but you're getting Malkus through a backdoor entrance because you convicted the guy of killing accidentally and trying to send him to exile into Gullus, that you get Malkus from that as well? Asya Rotseach. Same idea, Gezerah Shava. Rotseach is, well, naturally mentioned by Rotseach, someone who murders, and also Rotseach is mentioned for here as well. So we learn from here that Edom Zomamin also, they don't get Malkus, they don't get 39 lashes if it is prior to Gemar Din, prior to the verdict being given. Okay. So because we've hung in here and we've made it through a lot of some more technical sugyas, some laws, the Gemara rewards us with a little bit of a story related to Edom Zomamin now. Okay. So Tanya, the Brisa teaches us, Amar Rabbi Yehuda ben Tavai. Rabbi Yehuda ben Tavai said, Erev ben Achama im lo harakti eid zomein lahotzi milivan shel tzedukim shel omrim in Edom Zomamin hargan shari kanidon. You know, it's an expression. If I were to see I would not see the consolation. I won't see the redemption of the Jewish people. He's saying it, basically saying, I showed it to those Sadukim that I found a guy who committed perjury. It was after the Gemar Din, but before he actually managed to put that guy to death on his word, and I punished him with capital punishment through the din of Edom Zomamin, to show it to the Tzedukim there. Amar lo Shum and Shatach, Erev Achamim lo shafachta dam naki. I mean, you just spilled innocent blood. Shari Amar Chachamim, Ein Edom Zomamin hargin ad sheyizmu shnehem. You don't get, right, we know this idea already. You don't put only one witness. You can't just make an Eid Zomin. You need the entire kat, the entire group, to be found guilty of hazama, to make them into Edom Zomim. You can't have only one Eid Zomim. So when you put that guy to death for being an Eid Zomim, a singular Eid Zomim, that was not right. He wasn't actually an Eid Zomim. If he wasn't an Eid Zomim, then he wasn't deserving of capital punishment. So you basically just murdered that guy. That was not correct. So miyad kibal of Rabbi Yehuda ben Tavai shina mor hora elef neshum shatach. So immediately Rabbi Yehuda ben Tavai accepted upon himself never to rule when halacha when he wasn't in the presence of Shimon ben Shatach because of that. V'chol yamav shel Rabbi Yehuda ben Tavai haya mishtacheach al kibro shel oso ha'ed. And for the rest of his days of his life, he would spend his days prostrating on the grave of this person who he put to death and basically probably begging him to forgive him. And during nighttime, they didn't really see him, so they would hear a voice emanating from that location. So many people thought that what they heard was the voice of this Eid Zomim, or not really this Eid Zomim, this person who was convicted as an Eid Zomim. So they thought they heard his voice from the great beyond because he couldn't be at peace until there was justice. Amar, but Rabbi Yehuda ben Tavai responded, Koli Shalihu, what you're hearing is not his voice, you're hearing my voice, begging him to forgive me. Teidu, and now how do we know that's true? Lamachar hu meis ein kolo nishma, because what happened is after Rabbi Yehuda ben Tavai passed away, they didn't hear any voices anymore. So we assume that it was his voice the entire time. However, maybe it was actually the voice of that Eid Zomim that they were hearing from the great beyond. Now, why do we stop hearing this voice after Yehuda ben Tavai passes away? Either because Dilma Bedina Kambade, maybe they finally were able to duke it out in the Beis Din Shel Mala. They brought their grievances to the heavenly court and they figured it out there. Inami Pisui Paise, or maybe he actually, at the end of the day, was able to appease this person, the Eid Zomim, who he unrightfully put to death. And that's why we didn't hear his voice anymore. So it remains a mystery up until today. Was it the voice of Yehuda ben Tavai that they heard, or was it the voice of the Eid Zomim from his grave that they were hearing? And that was the talk of the town at the time. I don't know the answer to that question. I'll leave it for you guys to decide.
A question. Do the two witnesses in a criminal case have to be together to see the crime, or can they be separate from different locations, see the same crime, or have the potential of it? So one is telling the truth and the other one is lying because they were not together.
So, you're saying
would cause you to put one to death and not the other one.
Well, so you can't have that, because in order to have Edom Zomim, both of them need to be found. The entire cat needs to be found guilty. In fact, actually,
what I'm asking is, do they have to be together to see the crime? Two witnesses.
They don't need
untruthful.
Well, they don't need to be literally together. Meaning the case of seeing from different windows is something that we'll be talking about soon, but we're actually going to see in the next Mishnah at the end of it, where it begins to tell us what does it mean to be part of one kat? How does one group form together? Why doesn't just every person become part of the same group? What makes someone part of the same group of witnesses? So actually, let's go on. If there are no more questions, the last thing we'll do for today is learn the next Mishnah. And the very end of the next Mishnah, on top of Vav and Aleph, Zadie, I think it will begin to address the point that you are raising. Okay?
Okay.
All right. Any other questions at this point? All right. I hope it's clear. Okay. Moving on to the next Mishnah. Now, what's important to know for the next Mishnah is that if you look in the pasuk, if you have the Torah or Hashalim with you, or maybe Safaria lets you do this as well, you'll see that there is a reference to Devarim Yud Zayin Vav, to Deuteronomy 17:6. And the pasuk goes as follows: Al pishnayim edim o shlosha edim yumas hames. By the word of 2 witnesses, or by the word of 3 witnesses, a person may be put to death in court. Now, there's 2 things that seem to be superfluous here. Number 1, what's the first thing that seems to be superfluous? The more obvious one.
3 witnesses.
Thank you. So 3 witnesses. If I know that 2 witnesses could put someone to death, Kal v'chomer, this is a Kal v'chomer that works, by the way, 3 witnesses should be able to put somebody to death. However, why does the pasuk need to tell me that 3 can do it? If 2 can do, why can't 3? And then the second thing that we should infer from here is that it says al pishnayim edim o shlosha edim. It didn't need to say the word edim twice. Exactly. Oh, Henry, very good. So it doesn't need to say edim twice. It can say al pishnayim o shlosha edim. That's all it needs to say. So why did it need to say edim twice? So because of these 2 seemingly superfluous words in the pasuk, our Mishnah is going to interpret them to learn a few halachos. So here we go. Al pishnayim edim o shlosha edim yumas hames. If 2 can put someone to death, why the pasuk you tell me 3 can put somebody to death? So there's going to be 4. I counted 4 different interpretations of why it tells us 3 in addition to 2 in the pasuk. They are not. The basic understanding is that they're not mutually exclusive. So all 4 of these inferences that are made can be true, but we're going to list what they are. So here we go. So number 1, what's one possible reason for why it says 3 in addition to 2? Elahak is shlosha l'shnayim. Ma shlosha mazimin as a shnayim. Just like 3 witnesses can convict 2 witnesses of being Edim Zomin, af hashnayim yuzmu es hagimel. So too, 2 witnesses can also convict 3 witnesses. I would have thought that if a pair of witnesses was greater in number, they would outrule the pair that has lesser. That's not true. 2 is just as powerful as 3. How do we know that 2 can even convict 100? Talmud Lomar Edim. So it teaches us through the second mention of Edim that bounces it from 3 to 100. So I needed the mentioning of 3 first to know that the pasuk in general wants to teach me that more witnesses could apply here. And then the extra word of Edim teaches me it goes even more than 3. It's not literally 2 can convict 3, but 2 can convict 100 in theory as well. That is interpretation number 1. Interpretation number 2. Rabbi Shimon Omer, Ma shnayim ein nahargin ad shiu shneim zomin. This is what we just learned actually in the Gemara. Flows in perfectly. Just as 2 witnesses cannot be put to death until both of them are found to be in zomin. Av shlosha ein nahargin ad shiu shloshtan zomin. So too, if you have a cot with 3 witnesses in there, all 3 of them need to be found guilty of hazama in order for all 3 to be in zomin. If 2 but not 3 are found guilty, not going to work. How do we know for 100? Edim. The actual word of Edim tells us even 100. Now interpretation number 3. Rabbi Akiva Omer. Now this is like a good drasha topic. Rabbi Akiva Omer loba shlishi lahakiel el lahachmir alav ulasus dino kiyotze be'elum. What's the purpose of saying 3 witnesses? It's not to teach a leniency. It's not trying to emphasize a way for having 3 witnesses can get you out of being in zomin. But actually what it wants to emphasize is that to tell us, I would have thought, you know what? The 3rd guy, they didn't really need him. 3 witnesses is no better than 2 witnesses in court. So, I would think if the pair of witnesses were found to be liars, they were convicted of perjury, punish the first 2 guys who gave their testimony, not the 3rd guy. Because really, the 3rd guy isn't adding anything substantively, anything legally to what the first two have already accomplished through their joint testimony. However, nonetheless, comes along the pasuk that tell us by mentioning 3 witnesses that even though the third guy may have been unnecessary, he's still going to be convicted with the same exact punishment as the other 2. So, and Bimkain anasha kasuv l'nifal la'over ka'over. And then if the Torah punishes those who are nitfal la'over avera, they didn't even do anything. They just were associated. They associated themselves with the people who were committing the sin. Alachas kama v'kama yeshalim schar lenitfal la'ose mitzvah ka'ose mitzvah. Kal v'chomer, even if you want to join a chesed program, you want to join whatever it might be, some sort of group, a chabura, people are doing a mitzvah, and you feel like you might not be contributing. There might be other people who are taking the lead on it, and you don't feel like you are contributing a lot significantly. God says, if you want to associate yourself with people who are performing mitzvos, if people who perform averos and they don't contribute much to that, they get punished. Certainly those who associate themselves with good deeds and performing mitzvos, how great their reward is, even if they don't feel like they're contributing anything great. Truth is, Hashem views it as such. That's what Rabbi Akiva comes to teach us. So there you go. You got a mini Shabbos sermon thrown into the Thursday night Gemara share. Moving on.
Which is on Wednesday night.
A Wednesday night, yeah, Wednesday night. That's right. It's only Wednesday. Okay. Umashnayim. So interpretation number 4. Umashnayim nimsa echmeim karov apostle edusan betela. Af shloshim echmeim karov apostle edusan betela. Now there's a special rule that if someone who's a puzzle, so in Sanhedrin talks of people who are puzzle for testimony. If you're Masachik Bakubya, you play with dice, not Dungeons and Dragons, but more like gambling. That could disqualify you from being a witness in court. And also, if you are a relative to one of the litigants, one of the people in the case, then also you are automatically disqualified. And if you join this group of witnesses, even though you're the only one who's illegitimate, you delegitimize your entire kat, your entire group of witnesses. And minayin afilu mea, even if you have a group of 100 people and you have one relative in there, it invalidates the entire group. Now, halach lamaisa, right? Forget Makkos for a moment. Where nowadays is this a major issue? Anyone know? Where is it a major issue where we have an event, there needs to be testimony, but there are also family members at that event who might disqualify everyone who's
weddings. Who's Medei Kedushin?
Ah, very good. So Henry is correct. So Henry says when it comes to a wedding, because what happens at a wedding? At the wedding, we look at all the pomp and circumstance, and it's a funny thing, by the way. It's a funny thing. When you look at kibudim, different honors to give out, people think maybe reading the ksuba is a bigger honor. People think, I'm already forgetting what people think are the big honors. But really, from a halachic standpoint, probably the biggest honor is being a witness under the chuppah there. Because the witnesses for the chuppah, the witnesses who are witnessing the kiddushin, for the kiddushin specifically being done, they effectuate the kiddushin, they effectuate the marriage. So, right, I hand the ring over to my wife, and the witnesses see that ring going on, and hopefully she doesn't go invisible at that moment at the same time. So when I put that ring on her and they see the kiddushin, it's not that they're witnesses, so maybe if there's a doubt if I was ever married to her, they'll come into court one day and they'll testify that Moshe Kurtz got married to Marissa Kurtz on August 28, 2018. Oh, wow, I remember that. Marissa, I remembered our anniversary. Okay. So it's not just that they're going to come one day and testify on that, but actually they're not just, they're there to effectuate the actual kiddushin. If you don't have 2 valid witnesses watching the kiddushin be done, watching him put the ring on her finger, giving her the ksuba, then they are not married. Crazy, right? That's why it's very important. You can't just pick 2 random people to be witnesses. Many people, they try to pick 2 rabbanim, people who are hopefully keeping Taharas HaMishpacha or keeping family purity laws to be witnesses so that they're not invalidated. Now,
That's
this
also
here,
why, if Rabbi, excuse me, that's also, I think, why the Messiah Kedushin sometimes says that these are the witnesses to the exclusion of
yes.
everybody else, right?
So what you're talking about is the Ritva. What Henry's referencing is the Ritva. The Ritva says he's supposed to be Miyachi de Edom. So that's why you don't just happen, why do I need two witnesses up there? Everyone's watching. We have a whole room full of witnesses. Well, what we're doing is we're designating two valid witnesses to the exclusion of all others. That way, they don't become invalidated along with everybody else. And I can see some people here are in the Sunday morning Chumash class. Many months ago, we talked about this as well. So a little bit of chazara. Anyway, let's wrap this up. How do we know this rule applies for even 100? That if you have a relative in there, it'll invalidate it. Tamalomar Edom. Now, on this specific ruling, we have a machlokis in the Mishnah. Amar Rab Yossi, B'medavar Amurim. Where does this rule apply? Maybe B'dini Nefashos. When it comes to Dina Nefashos is such a serious matter. We don't want to get anything wrong before we put someone to death. We have to know we have an airtight argument, airtight proof that this guy is guilty before we convict him and put him to death. So maybe there, if one of the witnesses is invalidated, we see that there's issues going on here, that there's some sort of, maybe a family plot going on to put this guy to death. So we're not going to do that. But Al-Badini Mamnis, this guy is Bashar. But if I have three witnesses, only one of them is invalidated. When it comes to monetary matters, the stakes aren't as high. So there we'll let their testimony be admissible and accepted, even if one of the witnesses is a karov, is a relative. However, Rebbe Omer, actually, the same issue applies to Dinei Mamnos. If one is disqualified, everyone is disqualified. But here's a leniency, though. But the Amasai is Macha Husbehen. Now, this goes back to my grandfather's point. How do we define when you're part of the same group? So perhaps witnesses are only automatically part of the same kat when they gave the hasra, the warning to the guy not to kill him. Remember, in order to convict someone and give them capital punishment, they need hasra. They need to be warned not to do it prior to committing that action. If they do it, then it's fully premeditated at that point and they're put to death. So how do we know these witnesses are part of the same group? If they, as a group together, gave a warning to this guy, it's very clear that they're part of the same group. Because what would happen, imagine if you automatically get connected to any kat of witnesses. So that's absurd. Imagine somebody God forbid, murders your relative right in front of your very eyes. So because you witness your relative's murder, that means all the other witnesses are not valid to testify? That's untenable. Think about how many murderers would get away on that basis. So even though this rule applies to Dinei Mamnos, to monetary matters as well, that one guy disqualifies everyone, in order to become part of that kat of witnesses, you actually have to intentionally showed that you were interested in being part of the same group, usually by giving hasra together with them as well. Okay, and that ends the Mishnah. And as you can see, God willing, next week will actually be a very quick one. It's a much shorter Amud. There is, we do have a few minutes left, so I just want to share one idea from Chashuki Chamed that I think we'd appreciate. So on the idea in the Mishnah that we learned before about those who are nitful the ose mitzvah, or koose mitzvah, those who are accessories to those who are performing a mitzvah, it's like you're performing the mitzvah yourself. So there's a question that he brings up about, let's say there's a guy nearby who is trying to make a minyan in my yeshuv. This is in Israel. So I live in my yeshuv, I live in my community, and there's a guy who's trying to put together a minyan. But I know on the one hand, he's trying to put together a minyan, but on the other hand, there's a bigger community nearby, which has a huge minyan that I can attend every day. So what's the milah to that? What's the purpose of joining the bigger minyan? Rav Hadras Melech. The more people glorifying God in the same location, the greater the Kiddush Hashem, the greater glory it is to Hashem. So is it better to help this guy out, or is it better to help out that community trying to make 10 men for the minyan in the morning every day? Or is it better to just join that big minyan and have Ravam Hadras Melech? So we're not going to go through the whole piece right now, but he says, based on Chazal, Kafil mishu rak me'asari shonim amr Chazal shnotos schar neged kol abayim achreihem. That there's a lot of great things that the rabbis say about someone who's among the first 10 to show up to minyan, that he gets schar, he gets reward, like all the other people who come afterwards. So therefore, he concludes that it's better actually to, as he says, be nitfal la'osei mitzvah, be involved with those who are trying to perform the mitzvah of putting together this minyan, rather than defaulting to the big minyan for Ravam Hadras Melech. I think there's another session that's on in a few minutes, so we're just going to end this session right now, and you'll just have to restart it because otherwise the recording will dissipate. But Yasher Koach, thank you everyone for adjusting your schedules.
Thank you so much. Thank
And
you.
wishing
Thank
everyone
you.
a Freilichen Purim.
Thank you, everyone.
Amen.